It was a quiet Friday evening in Portland when Emily Carter finally stopped running from her thoughts. She sat alone in her small apartment, the dim light of her desk lamp glowing over a half-finished cup of coffee and a list of names she had been staring at for an hour. The air outside was crisp, the kind that hinted winter was near, but inside her heart was restless. Emily had built a career as a successful event designer known for her creativity, her calm under pressure, her perfect taste, but that night she felt anything but calm. Something inside her told her it was time to face what she had left unfinished. She picked up her phone and typed a single message. "I need your help this weekend. All three of you. Please say yes." She hesitated for a long second before pressing send. 3 names, 3 different chapters of her life. Daniel and Mia. They had once been her everything, each in their own way, and somehow she had drifted from all of them. It wasn't out of anger, not even pride. It was simply time and life pulling her in different directions. But lately, she had begun to feel a heavy emptiness, like she had forgotten who she was beneath all the success and deadlines. Alex was her first love, the one who had made her believe in forever when she was just 20. They'd met in college, both young, creative, and foolishly certain they'd never hurt each other. But life had tested them, and when her mother got sick, Emily had pulled away. By the time she was ready to love again, Alex had moved to Chicago and started a new life. Still, a part of her heart carried his name in quiet corners. Daniel was her coworker. Dependable, kind, always there when she needed someone to listen. They had spent countless late nights together in the design studio, building ideas, laughing over takeout, sharing quiet moments that almost turned into something more but never did. Emily had always known Daniel cared deeply for her, but she wasn't ready to accept his feelings, afraid of hurting him the way she once hurt Alex. And then there was Mia, her oldest friend, almost a sister. They'd grown up on the same street, shared secrets, heartbreaks, and dreams. But even their friendship had faded after a painful misunderstanding years ago. Emily had always planned to make things right, but someday never came. Until now. The message was short, but it carried the weight of years of silence. She didn't explain why she wanted them to come. She just hoped they would trust her enough to say yes. She waited for their replies, her phone screen glowing like a heartbeat in the dark. The first message came from Alex. "I'll be there." Just simple words, but they made her heart skip. The second came from Daniel. Predictable and warm, of course. "What time?" The third came from Mia. Cheerful, as always. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Emily leaned back and closed her eyes, relief washing over her. They were all coming. Whatever happened next, she knew she was finally doing something right. The next morning, she drove 2 hours north to her late father's old Lake Cottagea place she hadn't visited in years. It was quiet, surrounded by tall pine trees and a wide stretch of silver water that shimmered under the November sky. The house smelled faintly of cedar and memory. She dusted off the furniture, opened the windows, began to decorate the place the way she used to when she was happiest. Soft string lights hung across the porch. A long wooden table stood in the center of the room, covered with sketches, paints, and half-finished decor pieces from old projects she never completed. It wasn't just a workspace. It was a reflection of her heart, scattered but still full of beauty. As she arranged the candles and fabric samples, she thought about why she'd asked them all to come. It wasn't for work, though that's what she'd told herself at first. It wasn't even about nostalgia. It was about close-ran rediscovery. She had spent years designing perfect events for others, but had forgotten how to celebrate her own life. She had poured so much of herself into creating beauty for clients that she'd forgotten what it meant to feel it for herself. Now, she wanted to create something honest, something that would help her remember who she truly was, beneath the layers of regret and perfection. She had an idea, an emotional project called Moments That Changed Us, and she wanted to feature 3 defining stories of her life. That's why she needed Alex, Daniel, and Mia. They weren't just people from her past, they were the chapters that shaped her by late afternoon. Everything was ready. The cottage glowed with warm light, the scent of cinnamon candles filling the air. Emily stood at the window, watching the sun melt behind the trees. Her heart pounded with a mix of nerves and excitement. What if they felt awkward? What if old emotions surfaced? What if this plan didn't heal but reopened wounds she thought were closed? Just then, she heard the sound of tires on gravel. Her heart jumped. Alex was the first to arrive, stepping out of his car with that same calm, confident smile she remembered. His hair was a little shorter now, a little grayer, but his eyes still had that warmth that once made her feel safe. "You always did love dramatic setups," he said, smiling as he stepped inside. "This place looks amazing." Before she could answer, another car pulled up. Daniel walked in holding a cardboard tray of coffee cups. "You said we'd need energy," he said lightly. "And caffeine counts as emotional support, right?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes softened when he saw her. Moments later, Mia burst through the door, as bright as ever. "Okay, this feels like one of your surprise projects. Don't tell me you're planning to make us paint walls or something?" Emily laughed, though her voice trembled a little. "No walls," she said softly. "Just memories." They looked at her, curious. "Memories?" Alex asked. Emily nodded, trying to steady her breath. "I'm designing an exhibit called Moments That Changed Us. It's about the moments that define who we become. I realized the biggest ones in my life weren't about success or work, they were about the three of you." The room fell silent for a moment. She could feel their surprise, maybe even confusion, but also something unspoken understanding. "I want us to recreate those memories," she continued. "The ones that made us who we are. The laughter, the heartbreak, the lessons. I want honesty, not perfection." Daniel smiled softly. "You mean we're reliving the past?" Emily nodded. "Just for one night, to see how far we've come." For the first time in a long while, she saw something pure in their faces: hope, curiosity, maybe even forgiveness. As they began unpacking old photos and sharing small jokes, the air filled with a strange warmth. The evening that had started with nervous silence slowly turned into laughter. Emily stood quietly for a moment, watching the people who had shaped her life come together under one roof. For the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole still. Deep inside, she knew this night was only beginning, and what waited ahead might change everything. The next morning, the lake was wrapped in soft mist, and the air smelled of pine and wet earth. Emily woke up early, her heart steady, but her thoughts racing. Today was the day she'd asked for, when the past and present would finally meet under one roof. She looked around the cottage, still glowing from the warm light she'd hung the night before. The candles had melted halfway down, and sketches from her old projects were spread across the table like silent witnesses to her journey. She took a deep breath, tied her hair back, and whispered to herself, "Let's begin." By mid-morning, everyone was awake and gathered around the table. Alex stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the fog roll over the lake. Daniel was arranging tools and paintbrushes, his organized nature taking over, while Mia sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a photo album she had brought. The atmosphere was calm, but heavy with unspoken things, memories that had been buried, words that had gone unsaid. Emily cleared her throat. "Before we start, I just want to thank you all for coming. I know it might feel strange being here together after so long, but I wanted this weekend to be about remembering who we were on, who we became." Mia smiled warmly. "We're here, Em. Whatever this is about, we're doing it together." That reassurance gave Emily courage. "I want to recreate 3 moments," she said. "Each of you represents one. They're not about mistakes or regrets, they're about growth. I want honesty, not perfection." Alex raised an eyebrow. "So we're digging into the past, huh?" She nodded. "Yes, but in a good way." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then where do we start?" Emily led them outside to the old barn by the lake. The roof was half-rusted, but the wood still smelled the same. "This was our first memory," she said, turning to Alex. "Do you remember painting stars up there?" Alex laughed softly. "Of course. We wanted to make the roof glow at night. You said it would remind us to dream even when we're tired." Emily's eyes softened. "You still remember that?" "How could I forget?" he said, his voice gentle. That night was when I realized I loved you. The air between them grew still. Emily looked down, her hands trembling slightly. I loved you too, she said quietly. But I didn't know how to keep love and grief in the same heart. When my mom died, I just shut everything off. Alex nodded. I know I didn't understand it back then, but I do now. For a moment, silence filled the barn. Not awkward, but peaceful, like both had finally accepted something they'd run from for years. Then Mia clapped her hands. All right, enough emotional staring. Let's paint, she said playfully. Laughter broke the tension, and soon they were climbing ladders, dipping brushes into silver paint, and painting stars across the old roof once again. Daniel hummed an old song they used to love. Alex worked beside Emily, steady and quiet, while Mia threw paint drops in the air just to make them laugh. For a while, it felt like the years hadn't passed at all when they finished. The barn roof shimmered faintly under the daylight. Emily stood back and smiled. It's perfect, she whispered. Alex turned to her. Do you ever wish we had tried again? After everything. Emily's heart caught in her throat. She met his eyes and said softly, sometimes. But maybe we were meant to love each other just long enough to grow up. He smiled sadly. Maybe that's enough. As they walked back toward the cottage, Emily felt lighter, as if she had returned something to its rightful place in her heart. But she knew there was more to face. After lunch, Daniel took charge of the second memory. My turn, he said, clearing a corner of the cottage. He opened a box filled with old design tools, rulers, color palettes, scraps of fabric, and began setting them out like a miniature version of their old office. Emily couldn't help but laugh. You even brought the same broken ruler. He grinned. You used to say it was lucky. I never threw it away. They recreated the small studio space where they had once spent countless nights designing projects together. As they worked, the air filled with quiet laughter and nostalgia. Daniel glanced at her every so often, and finally, as he adjusted a lamp, he said softly, Do you remember that night when the power went out? And we finished the whole presentation by candlelight. Emily smiled. Of course. I spilled coffee on the final sketch, cried for 10 minutes, and you somehow fixed it. He looked at her, his voice lower now. That night, I almost told you how I felt. But you were still healing from everything. I didn't want to add to your pain. Her hands paused over the paper. She looked at him, her voice trembling slightly. And you stayed, even when I didn't deserve that. Daniel smiled sadly. You didn't have to deserve it. I just cared. For a moment, their eyes met, and the air between them filled with the warmth of everything they had never said. Emily took a slow breath. Thank you, Daniel, for being the one constant thing when everything else fell apart. He chuckled softly. Well, someone had to keep you from painting the wrong walls. The laughter that followed was light, genuine, and healing. The tension that had existed between them for years finally melted into something comfortable. Like the understanding that real affection didn't always need to turn into love to be meaningful. By late afternoon, only one memory was left to Mia's. The three of them followed her outside to the small garden behind the cottage. The soil was covered with weeds, but beneath them were traces of the wildflowers they had planted years ago. After Emily's mother had passed away, Mia knelt down and touched the dirt. Do you remember why we did this? She asked softly. Emily nodded. Mom loved wildflowers. She said they were proof that beauty doesn't ask for permission to exist. Mia began pulling out weeds, her hands gentle. You stopped coming here after she passed. I thought maybe you didn't want to remember. Emily's voice shook. It wasn't that. I just didn't know how to come back without her. Daniel handed them a small packet of seeds he'd found in the shed. Then let's make new memories, he said, together. The three of them planted the seeds, the sound of their laughter mixing with the soft rustle of wind through the trees. When they were done, Mia lit 3 small candles by the garden's edge. For her, she said, they stood in silence for a moment, the lake glimmering in the background, the candles flickering gently. Mia finally broke the silence. You've spent so long helping everyone else move forward. Maybe it's your turn now." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "That's why I asked all of you to come, to remind myself that I wasn't ever really alone." The light faded into dusk, painting the sky in gold and purple. The four of them sat together, not as broken pieces from the past, but as people who had finally made peace with it. But deep down, Emily knew the night wasn't done. There was still one last thing she needed to do, something that would close the final chapter for good. The sun was setting over the lake, turning the water gold. The air inside the cottage felt different, warmer, heavier, as if the memories they'd shared all day had opened something in each of them. Emily looked around at the faces she once knew better than her own Alex. Daniel and Mian felt both gratitude and fear. The day had been full of laughter and nostalgia, but the night, she knew, would bring truth. There were still things left unspoken, things they all needed to face before morning came. After dinner, Emily lit candles across the living room. Their soft light flickered on the old walls, creating a cozy, almost magical glow. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, and the sound of waves against the dock whispered like a heartbeat. "There's one last part to this," she said quietly, standing near the table. "It's not about rebuilding or recreating anymore. It's about honesty." Mia tilted her head. "Honesty? You mean like confession time?" Emily smiled nervously. "Something like that. We've gone back through the past, and now I want to talk about what came after. What it all meant." Daniel leaned forward. "You said this project this whole weekend was called Moments That Changed Us. Maybe now it's time to talk about how we actually changed." Emily nodded. "Exactly." She walked over to the table and unfolded an old canvas from her design studio. On it, she had drawn 3 circles that overlapped slightly each, labeled with their names. "I made this years ago," she said softly. "It was supposed to be a map of my life, how each of you left a mark on it. I didn't realize back then how much I needed to understand those marks to move forward." Alex smiled faintly. "You always needed to turn feelings into something visual." "I guess it was my way of making sense of things," she said. "But I stopped painting this after we drifted apart. I didn't know how to finish it because I didn't know how I felt anymore." The room went quiet. Daniel's eyes softened. "So what do we do tonight?" Emily took a deep breath. "We finish it, but with truth. We each share what we carried after everything ended, what we never said." Mia raised her glass of tea and grinned gently. "To the truth, then." They began with Alex. He looked hesitant at first, turning the cup in his hands. "When you left, he said, 'I thought you didn't love me anymore.' I told myself that for years. But the truth is, I never stopped hoping you'd walk back into my life one day. Even after I moved on, part of me was still waiting." Emily felt her throat tighten. "I wanted to come back, Alex, but I wasn't ready. I was angry at myself for letting life fall apart, and I didn't want you to see me broken." He smiled softly. "You were never broken, Em, just scared." For a moment, she didn't speak. The silence was full but peaceful, like a wound finally being cleaned. Then she turned to Daniel. "Your turn." He looked thoughtful, almost shy. "All right, truth. I loved you too, Emily. Not like Alex did. Mine was quieter, slower. It built over time. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to be another person who made you feel pressured to choose. But I think part of me always waited for a moment when you'd finally see me." Emily blinked back tears. "I did see you, Daniel. I just didn't know what to do with what I saw. You were everything safe, everything stable, and maybe that scared me more than heartbreak did." He smiled gently. "You don't owe me anything. You being happy is enough." Then Mia leaned forward, her eyes warm. "My turn, I guess. You already know I was mad at you for years. You shut me out after your mom died, and I didn't understand why. But looking back, I realized I wanted you to grieve the way I thought you should. I didn't know how to help, so I blamed you for walking away. The truth is, I missed my best friend." Emily reached over and took her hand. "I missed you too. I thought you'd be better off without my sadness." Mia laughed softly through a tear. "You were never too much, You just forgot that people wanted to love you, not fix you." The words hit Emily deeply. She had spent so many years avoiding her emotions, hiding behind work, pretending she was fine. But in that quiet moment, surrounded by the three people who had known her best, she realized she didn't have to hide anymore. They moved closer to the table where the unfinished canvas lay. The three circles still overlapped, empty in the middle. Emily picked up a brush and dipped it into gold paint. "This part," she said, touching the middle of the canvas, "is where we all meet again, where everything connects." She began painting slow strokes while the others watched. The gold shimmered under the candlelight, warm and soft, almost alive. As she painted, she spoke quietly. "I spent years thinking I was defined by what went wrong, relationships that ended, friendships that faded, dreams that changed. But maybe those things weren't endings. Maybe they were just lessons I needed to grow." Alex nodded. "Sometimes love doesn't stay forever, but it still matters," Daniel added. "And sometimes people don't stay in your life, but what they teach you stays forever." Mia smiled. "You sound like a quote on a coffee mug." Everyone laughed, the tension breaking into something tender. The night outside had deepened, and through the window, the stars began to appear bright and silent, like the ones they'd painted earlier that day. Emily looked at them and felt something inside her settle. After a moment, she turned back to the others. "I have one more thing planned before we end the night," she said. "What's that?" Daniel asked. "I want each of you to write one truth something you'd never told me before, anything. Then leave it here before you go tomorrow." Mia tilted her head. "Why?" "Because I want to remember this night as the moment we stopped pretending," Emily said softly. "Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest." The others nodded, understanding. No one argued or joked this time. They knew this was important to her as the night went on. They stayed by the fire, sharing stories, small jokes, and quiet smiles. The warmth of the flames reflected in their eyes, and for the first time in years, Emily felt surrounded not by ghosts of what was lost, but by the living proof of what still remained: care, forgiveness, connection. At one point, Alex picked up his guitar from the corner and started playing softly, the same song they used to listen to in college. The melody filled the cottage like a memory reborn. Emily leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, letting the music carry her back and forward at the same time. When the last note faded, Daniel looked at her and said quietly, "You did it. You brought us all back together." She smiled through her tears. "I didn't bring you back. You never really left." Outside, the lake shimmered under the moonlight. The stars they had painted earlier that day glowed faintly on the barn roof, their light reflected in the water like little promises of healing. Emily looked around at the people who had once held her heart in pieces and realized she didn't need to choose between them, or between past and present. All she needed was this truth that love, in all its forms, had always been enough. And as the fire crackled and laughter echoed softly through the night, she knew the story wasn't ending. It was simply finding its peace. The morning light poured through the cottage windows, soft and golden, touching everything it met. Emily woke early, long before the others, her thoughts calm but alive. The lake outside was still like glass, and the faint scent of last night's candles lingered in the air. She sat at the wooden table where they had talked and laughed for hours, the unfinished canvas still lying there, now dry and glimmering with strokes of gold. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, but she also knew something was still left to do. On the table sat 4 blank cards she had placed there the night before. She looked at them for a long time, then took a pen and wrote at the top of each, "One truth you never told me." That was her final request to Alex, Daniel, and Mia before they left. She wanted to close this weekend not with grand speeches or tears, but with honest quiet, written and lasting. By the time the others woke up, the air was full of the smell of fresh coffee and toast. Mia stumbled into the kitchen first, hair messy, wearing one of Emily's old sweatshirts. "You're up early," she said, rubbing her eyes. Emily smiled. "Couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts." Daniel appeared next, holding his sketch pad from last night. "I was thinking," he said, "we should frame that canvas you painted. It feels like more than art, net, feels like a memory." "I might just do that," Emily said softly. Alex was the last to come in, calm as always. "It's a perfect morning," he said, glancing outside. "Still water, quiet air. It feels like the end of something, or the beginning." Emily replied after breakfast. She explained what she wanted them to do. "Before you go," she said, holding up the cards, "I'd like each of you to write one truth you've never told me. It can be small or big, serious or simple. I won't read them until you've left. It's just something for me to hold on to something real." They looked at one another, surprised but understanding. No one asked why. They simply nodded. Each of them took a card and found a quiet corner of the cottage while they wrote. Emily stepped outside and walked toward the lake. The sunlight danced on the surface, scattering tiny reflections across the water. The air was crisp, and the sound of birds echoed from the trees. She felt both full and empty, like her heart had been cleaned out. Leaving room for something new to begin, inside, one by one, they finished their cards. Mia was the first to set hers down, smiling softly. "Don't peek until we're gone," she said. Daniel placed his next, giving her a reassuring nod. "Some truths are easier written than spoken." Alex hesitated a moment before laying his down. "Be kind to yourself when you read it," he said gently. When they left, Emily stood at the doorway, waving as their cars disappeared down the old gravel road. The quiet that followed wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. She went back inside, sat at the table, and looked at the 3 cards. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the first one. Alex's handwriting was neat, familiar. His note read, "You were my first love, and the only one who ever taught me how to let go. Loving you showed me what real love means, not keeping someone, but wishing them peace even when they're not with you." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She smiled through them, whispering, "Thank you, Alex." It wasn't sadness, it was closure. She opened Daniel's next. His handwriting was messy, the ink slightly smudged. "I never stopped believing in you. Even when you doubted yourself, even when you disappeared, I always knew you'd come back stronger. I didn't love you to be chosen. I loved you because you made life brighter." She pressed her hand to her heart, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words. Daniel's love had never demanded anything, it had simply existed, steady and kind. Finally, she opened Mia's card. The handwriting was bold, the kind of writing that always looked confident. Even when the writer wasn't. "You've always carried everyone's pain. You forget you don't have to. You are stronger than any heartbreak, any mistake, any memory. Stop doubting it. You've already won the hardest battles." That one made her cry. The kind of tears that don't come from sadness, but from release. For years, she had been trying to fix everything, to make amends, to rebuild connections, to make sense of what was lost. And yet, here was the truth. She had never truly lost anything. The people who mattered had always stayed, in one way or another. When she finished reading, Emily placed the cards neatly inside a small wooden box that once belonged to her mother. She closed the lid gently and whispered, "Thank you." She walked outside again, the wind soft against her face. The barn roof shimmered in the distance, the painted stars from yesterday catching the morning sun. She walked down to the lake, the water cool and calm, and sat on the edge of the dock. For a while she just watched the ripples, move slow, graceful, endless dot in her mind. She replayed the weekend. The laughter, the awkward pauses, the confessions, the tears. Each moment felt like a brushstroke on the canvas of her life. It wasn't a perfect painting, but it was real. And maybe that was what mattered most. She thought of Alex and the bittersweet way he'd said goodbye. Of Daniel's quiet loyalty and the comfort it brought her. Of Mia's fierce honesty and how it had pushed her to see her own strength. They each represented something she had needed to learn. Love, patience, and courage. And now, finally, she understood. Emily stood and took a deep breath. I asked all three of them to do it, she whispered to herself, smiling faintly. And oh boy, I was thrilled not because they came, but because I finally came back to me. She stayed there for a while, letting the wind brush her hair, the water shimmer below her feet. The peace she felt wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, steady, like the calm after a long storm. Later that day, before leaving the cottage, Emily decided to finish the painting one last time. She picked up her brush, dipped it in soft blue, and added a final shape in the center of the golden circles, a small heart. Not perfect, not symmetrical, just real. She signed her name below it, Emily Carter, The Moments That Changed Us. When she looked at the finished piece, she smiled. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about how far she'd come, and how love in all its imperfect forms had shaped her into the woman she was now. She packed up the rest of her things, closed the door of the cottage behind her, and took one last look at the lake. The reflection of the painted stars shimmered softly on the water, as if the night before was still alive in the daylight. Driving away, she didn't feel sadness, just warmth, a sense of completion. She realized that the people we love don't always stay forever, but their impact does. It lives quietly in the way we see the world and the choices we make. In the peace we learned to find. As the cottage disappeared in the rearview mirror, Emily whispered a quiet goodbye to her past, her pain, and the parts of herself she'd finally forgiven. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a new one, written not in regret, but in gratitude.